Hello, I'm Michelle McKinney Hammond, best-selling author, relationship expert, and life coach. Are you tired of the same cycles happening in your relationships? Do you want to know how to get from hello to I do? Are you wondering, is there really a place called happy as a single? What do you do until love finds you? If you want to know the answer to all of these questions and more, you need to be a part of the Love You Masterclass. You'll get access to so many things. 50 days of amazing curriculum that you can utilize at your own speed, 3 masterclasses with me answering all of your questions, and access to the Love You community. All for an amazing price that I'm offering you now at 50% off for the month of February only. I believe in you and your capacity to give and receive love. You don't want to miss this class. So sign up today. So when I start talking, don't say, what's she talking about? I thought we were going to talk about relationships. We are going to talk about relationships, but I'm going to lay a little bit of foundation first is all I really wanted to say. I was talking about goal setting yesterday, and in that, the issue of setting the goal of marriage came up. And I was asking God, is that really something we can do? Because in my heart of hearts, I don't feel that marriage should be a goal. And I'll get into why later, okay? Let me start off with this. Proverbs 16, 1-3, the Message version says, mortals make elaborate plans, but God has the last word. Humans are satisfied with whatever looks good, but God probes for what is good. Put God in charge of your work or your plans, I'm going to say today. Then what you've planned will take place. So I believe that when we aspire for things, that we need to make sure that God is in agreement with our aspiration, or it's just a wish. The New Living Translation version says, we can make our own plans, but the Lord gives the right answer. People may be pure in their own eyes, but the Lord examines their motives. Commit your actions to the Lord, and your plans will succeed. The Lord has made everything for his own purposes. And I'm going to stress that we were made for his purposes first. Okay. The benefits of things that we get into, like acquire, are God's blessings on our lives, only if they fit in with his purposes. Because ultimately we were created to worship him, to please him, to be a part of an elaborate and glorious plan. It says in Ephesians that long before we were even on the earth, that God had his eye on us and had us in mind, and his intentions toward us was for glorious living. So before you even started thinking about what you thought glorious living looked like, God had glorious living plans for your life. So we need to tap in to what those plans are in his mind, agree with him, partner with him, and then we see things begin to unfold. You see, I think that in relationships, we tend to put the cart before the horse. And I said before, I do not believe that marriage should be a goal. If it is, you will most likely marry the wrong party, because the goal will displace fulfilling of purpose, which leads you to the right partner. Now, I'm going to give you an example of this so that you understand what I'm saying. I had a friend who tied a piece of rope around her wrist one year. And she said that she had decided that she was going to be married within a year, and that the rope was a reminder every day she did her affirmations. And let me tell you, this stuff will work for you, but it can work against you as well. She did her affirmations and she got married. However, the marriage did not last. She did have 2 children, and then it was a heartbreaking end, and it did not last. She is now remarried. And I would have to say that her partner is perfect for her purpose. You see, her values and her belief system and that of her husband's were not in alignment. So she got what she wanted, but it wasn't sustainable because it wasn't God's best for her. And now she's in an amazing marriage with the right partner that aligns with her purpose, with her values, with her beliefs. They are truly partners, kingdom partners, divine kingdom partners, because they're in perfect alignment with the vision that they had for their lives, according to God. Now I'm going to mention to you something else to consider. Eve, Ruth, Rachel, Rahab, Esther, all of these women were presented to their mates by God. And trust me, purpose had everything to do with their placement. We know that Ruth was in Moab and was the most unlikely to succeed because of her background. But she traveled with her mother-in-law back to Bethlehem to serve her mother-in-law and happened upon a field and was noticed by Boaz and ended up in the lineage of Jesus Christ himself. Esther was chosen. Rahab was living in a tower, hoping to escape from her lifestyle, assisted some spies from Israel and helping them escape. And she also ended up ultimately in the lineage of Christ, married to a man named Salmon, who then was the great-grandfather of Boaz, who married Ruth. And then we know the story of Rachel. Rachel was just watering some lambs, okay? She was just taking care of the flock of her family and was handpicked by Abraham's servant to marry Isaac. Truly, the steps of the Lord, the steps of the righteous are ordered of the Lord. Now, each of these women were selected, handpicked to be married to who they were married to for kingdom purpose. Esther ended up saving the nation of Israel, married to a heathen king, even though she was a believer. Now, that's a whole other conversation. Don't try that one at home. But God used it at the time because she had been, she was in Babylon under duress, under oppression. Okay, they were there as slaves, but she was handpicked in the first beauty pageant and married to the king of Babylon and ends up saving the nation. So God has more in mind than your partnership. Your partnership fits into a very elaborate kingdom plan. And so where he places you, with whom he places you with is very, very significant. And I dare say that none of the women I just mentioned had marriage in mind as their goal. They were in purpose and they were presented to their partner, and they all played significant roles in God's plan unfolding. Making marriage a goal is like being in the middle of a desert and deciding you want ice cream. I would just lead you to frustration. And God is not the one who creates frustration in us. We create frustration in ourselves. However, if we get to the end of the desert and there happens to be an ice cream shop, then your desire is now in reach as the options lie before you. So we just have to really decide how we're aligning our desires, and are we really trusting God's timing? Now, is it wrong to desire love and marriage? No, we are to have our desires, but our desires should not have us. We need to master our desires and put them in perspective. For the single woman or man, there will always be the desire for love. And for the married woman or man, they'll say they're not experiencing enough love. How much is enough? How do we measure love? We each have different capacities for love. So if you need a gallon and your partner only has a pint, what do you do? Where does love begin? Where does it end? And how do we become fulfilled ultimately, no matter if people are loving us or not, no matter if we're married or not, no matter if your spouse pays attention to you or not? It begins with intimacy with the one who created love and is love. That's where it has to begin. You might be saying, oh, Michelle, I'm not up for a spiritual conversation today. I just want to get down to the nitty gritty. I want to have sex. I want to have a man in my life. I need somebody to help me with the bills. I need to be affirmed and validated as a woman, as a man. So where is this all going? Well, I'm getting there. Once again, I'm laying the foundation. We are triune beings. We are spirit, soul, body. We are a spirit that has a soul that lives in a body. And God does not ignore any of the layers of us. No, he does not. Okay. But it's got to be in the right order in our hearts, in our minds, in our spirits, the things that we crave, the things that we desire, so that we're not ruled by those things and constantly sad, depressed, and feeling out of sorts and wondering when is God going to show up. I'm talking about love now. I'm not talking about sex, because we're building a foundation. And great love makes amazing sex. So we've got to start at the root. And sex is not making love. It is confirming love. Okay. So we're putting everything in perspective here. Now, James says something very powerful. He says, don't let anyone say when they're tempted that I'm being tempted by God, because temptation doesn't originate from God, but from our own flaws. For God cannot be tempted. Okay. And he doesn't tempt anyone. The Phillips translation says, no one should ever say when they're tempted that God is tempting me, for God has no dealings with evil and does not himself tempt anyone. No, a man's temptation is due to the pull of his own inward desires, which can be enormously attractive. Okay. His own desires take hold of him, and that's what produces sin. And sin in the long run means death. And make no mistake about that, brothers and sisters of mine. Sin doesn't always have to be an action, is what we need to keep in mind. It can be a state of heart. It can be despising where God has placed us. It can be ingratitude because we're so focused only on what we want and not what God has provided. The Message translation says, don't let anyone under pressure to give in. And I know that for the singles, there is a pressure for compromising the people that we choose to be with, compromising lifestyle, morals, our relationship with God, because we so deeply want what we want. But don't say that God's trying to trip me up. God is impervious to evil and puts evil in no one's way. The temptation to give in to evil comes from us and only us. We have no one to blame but the leering, seducing flare-up of our own lust. And when lust gets pregnant, it has a baby, sin. And she grows up to adulthood and becomes a real killer. That's what the Message says. You see, God can't be tempted. I got hung up there on thinking about that, and I was like, God, why are you not tempted? And God said something so deep, and I got to share this with you. He said, I cannot be tempted because everything that I desire or require is already within me. So there's nothing outside of me that can pull me out of myself and cause me to compromise myself. That's why I never change, and there's not even a shadow of turning with me, because I am complete. I am whole. And in my wholeness, I am holy. And to me, that is the key to unlocking why we struggle with holiness so much, because we are a broken people. And the thought of being full to the fulfillment and not requiring anything outside of myself, not being moved by anything outside of myself, is an overwhelming but exciting thought to me. Because I know that when I get hungry, I get desperate. And desperation diminishes discernment. Let me say that again. Desperation diminishes discernment. You see, our desires can paint opportunities as God, but they might not be. This whole concept of being whole and full is really amazing. I was sharing with a friend of mine this morning when she called me on the phone. I had gotten so many deliveries of hampers and flowers and chocolates and goodies. And there's this huge hamper here that someone sent me that's like the size of my coffee table. And it's got every snack that you could possibly think of in it. Now, I love caramel corn. I love nuts. I love chocolate. But you know what? It was so much that I wasn't hungry at all. I haven't touched any of it because I got so overwhelmed by the abundance of it that I didn't feel hunger. And I said, this is what God is talking about. If I can tap into the abundance of his love, the abundance of his patience, the abundance of his extravagant and reckless passion for me, I won't desire anything else. And then I'm free to make good choices. Godliness with contentment is great gain. The Amplified says, it is indeed a source of immense profit for godliness accompanied with contentment. That contentment, which is a sense of inward sufficiency, is a great and abundant gain. Another translation says, godliness actually is a source of great gain when accompanied by contentment. That contentment that comes from a sense of inner confidence based on the sufficiency of God. You see, I think that part of our hunger for love is really tied to our self-esteem. It is our search for affirmation and validation. And yet these things can really only come from God in a sustainable fashion. The Phillips translation says, there's real profit, of course, but it comes only to those who live contentedly as God would have them live. We brought absolutely nothing with us when we entered the world, and we sure can take absolutely nothing with us when we leave. Do you know you can be married tomorrow and your spouse can die or leave or turn into a person that you don't know? What do you do then? If your contentment and your love is not rooted in something greater than them, greater than yourself. Philippians 4:11-13 says, not that I was ever in need. Paul is talking to the Philippian church. He says, but I've learned to be content with whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing or with everything, which I've had to do. Living in London, I've lived out of a suitcase now for 5 months. And I'm telling you, when I think about my closet now, I feel a little some way. I'm thinking to myself, how and why did I ever feel I needed all of this stuff? I can't even imagine wearing it all again. It's a very interesting place when God removes you from everything and you look back and see his perspective from a divine directive. The Message says, I've found the recipe for being happy, whether full or hungry, hands full or hands empty. Whatever I have, wherever I am, I can make it through anything in the one who makes me who I am. There it is again. The source of contentment comes from a validation, from a sense of affirmation from God himself. Not a person is mentioned in these scriptures. It is God who becomes the sufficiency. God is the one who makes him feel full, whole. Wholeness equals holiness. The Passion Translation says, I've learned to be satisfied in any circumstance. It's really important. Oh, someone's waving in from Rome. It's really important to know where our source of love must come from first. I remember some time ago, I was reading my word, and early on, actually, in my Christian existence, I read the scripture, Psalm 105:15, and it said God gave them their request, but sent leanness to their souls. That scripture just frightened me because I know how insistent I can be about the things that I want and how I can bug God for them. And we know the story of the widow who wore down the judge, and he finally said, you know what, she's going to keep coming. Let me just give her what she wants. And this scripture talks about that there comes a place where God will say, okay, like he did with the manna. They got tired of the manna and they wanted meat, and he let them have it, and they got really sick. They gorged themselves on it. He gave them what they wanted, but he allowed their souls to become weak because of it. I don't think that's what we want for our lives. I don't want to receive what I want and have it break me down spiritually and ruin my relationship with God. The Passion Translation says, they didn't want to wait to be told what to do. They only cared about pleasing themselves in that desert. And so they provoked God with their insistent demands. So he gave them exactly what they asked for. But along with it, they got an empty heart. They got an empty heart. But they were looking for something to make them full, and they ended up empty instead. Sometimes we create unnecessary trouble for ourselves. If we insist that God will give you what you want, there'll be consequences. God will give you what you want, but there will be consequences when we choose what we want over what God's choice is for us. God has to be the foundation and the floor of your house of love, okay? God is the floor. And when you get the floor and the foundation right, anything else that you add to it can stand firm and be sustainable. That's when the walls stay in place. And if the walls stay in place, then the roof stays in place and we're covered. And you know, wind will blow, storms will come, things will batter against the other parts of the house. But if the foundation is firmly planted, you can always rebuild and improve because the foundation is immovable. We have to keep in mind that the original source of love is God. Everyone and everything else is a resource. Let me say that again. The source is God. Everything else and everyone else is a resource. And so it is a resource of God's love, okay? The love that they have for you even has to be enabled by God himself. They have to get the love that they give to you from God. That's why it is a resource, okay? In order for it to be sustainable. Because true love is not easily offended because it draws joy, peace, and fulfillment from another source, which is God himself. So it doesn't feel the lack that other people try to impose on you with their actions or lack of action. Because if you're full of the love of God, everything else is like just a wonderful addition. It's the cherry on top of the cake. God is the cake. People are the frosting in the cherry. Guess what? The cake is still good without the frosting and without the cherry. It gets dressed up and it can be more delicious with those things, but it's not dependent on that to nourish you. You know, really, the only thing that's necessary for us is air, water, and food. And that's God. It's the breath of God. It's the water of the Spirit. He's the bread of life. He's the one who regenerates us and renews us and revives us. So what are you saying, Michelle? Are you saying I shouldn't make any goals for myself? I shouldn't pick anybody, blah, blah, blah. Well, there's an order for everything. But what I'm trying to say is it doesn't mean that we don't have any power. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that that you're abdicating your power of choice. No, I actually believe that when you've got the right foundation, it expands it. Okay. If we're trusting in the Lord to give us the desires of our heart, we're wiping the slate clean and we're allowing him to write on his heart what he desires for us. And when we agree with that, we become a winning partnership with the right assets and assistance to acquire our desires. But he has to be the center of your joy. Delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you your heart's desire. Take joy in the eternal. His gifts are coming and they're all that your heart desires.